Hi, I'm Nachami Rabin. I'm here with Devora Krasnianski of Adai Ad Institute. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about ways that we can help other people with struggles that they may be having in Shalom Bayis. These are lighter issues, not the deep issues that we know happen. That's not what we're addressing tonight. Tonight we want to talk about some of the things that happen more often that are definitely still issues, right? Definitely issues. We're not taking away from that, but more of the lighter issues. And before this evening, we reached out to hear from people what some of these issues are. I'm going to present them to Devora to get her wisdom and insight. And all of this is anonymous. Anything you wanted to add to that?
So when we're talking about not the hard issues, I just want to put up front what we're not talking about. People may come to you with issues like abuse or fears or mental illness or addictions. Those are real issues, but we're not going to be talking about how to support someone in those situations. If someone does come to you with that, show empathy and recuse yourself, unless, of course, you are a professional. And perhaps at the end we can talk a little bit about how to recuse yourself. We'll see how much time we have.
Which actually brings me to the very first question, is that somebody wanted to know, what is a good way for them to know when somebody is discussing things with them? How do they kind of make that border, that boundary between abuse and dysfunction, where abuse they're not qualified to help, and dysfunction they might be? As a friend, they can offer, some good ideas, some insight. Are there any things to look out for that could help you differentiate between the two?
So the first thing is to listen, to do a lot of listening first, because even if it is abuse, they are finally opening up, and it takes a while for someone to open up. So really first listen, so you don't shut them down and say, oh no, I can't deal with that. It takes people sometimes 6-7 years to open up. So they're finally opening up. Listen. And you're really listening for not only the information, but for their feelings behind it also. And you could ask some questions just to move the conversation along, but for the very longest beginning is just to listen. And just have a conversation listening, but not to offer anything. If you are hearing things like that feel off to you, that feel like it does sound like abuse, but I don't know, and then she's minimizing it, or she's coming up with all kinds of rationalizations for it after it may be more than you can handle. And anyway, even if it's dysfunction more than you can handle, you still should recuse yourself.
Right.
The other thing is, if you suspect that it is dysfunction, you can not shut down the conversation, but have the conversation, reach out to a professional to see how you might support this person. So it's better not to go into the area that may be abuse with the wrong answers. One of the most important things is do no harm. And if someone finally reached out and then you kind of say it's all going to be okay, you've just squashed another 5 years for them. So it's really important not to do the wrong thing. Sometimes it is, this is a lot. Let me think about it. And let's continue our coffee conversation in a couple days. I need some time to really think about how I can be helpful.
For sure. No, that's very important, especially when a lot of times conversations like this can happen in groups and social media, where everybody's very quick to just write a response. There's
a lot of, and I can understand why someone would put out their question into social media, because they just want to make it seem like anonymous, especially there are ways to put out their question anonymously, or they're asking for a friend or whatever it is, and they just want to get a sense from other people. But some people are just putting out the wrongest answers, and that's part of the reason why I'm so glad we are having this conversation, because the wrong answers can really shut someone down, or can help make someone think totally in the wrong direction, when they should be getting perspective about what is going on in their life, and someone just says, leave him or leave her, or how are you letting someone treat you like this? That's really not very helpful.
Right.
Especially when they don't have enough context to make such a statement.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The first thing how you're talking about, listen, get more information. If you're answering in 2 seconds because somebody made a post about, is this normal? This is what happened last night, and everybody gets all hysterical. We don't know what happened the other 4 nights. Maybe this is some sort of weird normal for them. Maybe it's because so many things happened, and they just kind of need to reconnect and say, this doesn't work for us, even when we're under so much stress.
So what's also interesting is on the social media responses are many times someone else's trigger, the responder trigger. And so that's why they're responding with such harsh words or so quickly. And it's like, you just said a whole bunch to this whole wide world, but that's like a separate point.
Right, very interesting. Okay, so one of the questions that we got is from a couple who eats over at a friend for Shabbos, and both the couple finds that in this home where they're at, there's a tension that they could feel at the table. And it's becoming more and more uncomfortable. And it's not just about, we don't want to accept the invite anymore. These are people that they are close to. And what would be the best way to say, there is help out there, or we notice something seems off? Is that appropriate to do? They're good friends.
Okay. So the first thing is, if they never ever came to see either one of you, like if the husband never came to the husband or to the wife, which sometimes happens, which is like a different scenario, but it's sometimes inappropriate, but sometimes not as inappropriate as it may off the bat sound to come to someone of the other gender. Sometimes it's worthwhile to get perspective, but really, if you're the one who's being approached, understand about boundaries in 100 different ways. But if none of that couple has come to the one who wants to help, it's a little bit, you have to really first daven, really, like to get this right, get the right words and the right timing. There's a whole bunch that matters. But one of the first sentences might be, and depending, you as a couple should determine who should come. Should the wife go to the wife? Should the wife go to the husband? Like, who should?
So don't stage an intervention.
Absolutely not.
Like, hi, we are here to help you.
And one of the reasons why you don't why one doesn't come to the couple or two come to the couple,
right,
is because if there really is abuse, and so you just got a whiff of tension, but there's really abuse, then it's going to make the abuse much worse. So if you have a sense of who is the one who's possibly the one who's being victimized, but again, we don't really know, and there's so much, then that's the one who you should talk to, not to the abuser, if you're getting some sort of sense.
Okay.
Because once the abuser realizes that people are onto him or her, and it goes both ways, by the way. I mean, statistically, it's more men on women, but they're not sure if that's because men don't report or what it is. I don't know. I don't want to take any numbers and statistics about that, but it definitely goes both ways, even in our community, or especially, I mean, you ask Hatzalah members, they have seen that, but that's like a whole different digression. But once the abuser knows that you're onto them, the abuse can get harsher.
Okay.
So that's one thing. And also, the one who is being abused will not admit anything or will rationalize because the abuser is right there.
Right.
So in general, it's best to have the conversations one-on-one with, or to the one that you think or guess or guesstimate, with some sort of context of what's going on. But the way, and you would start the conversation, I've noticed something, can I share what I've been noticing? And when you say I've noticed, because then there is the opportunity that you could have misnoticed it. And so you're just sharing something that I've observed, or the way it's coming across to me. Then you say, can I share something? So then you're asking for permission, because you're intruding into their life. So do it with as much humility as possible, at least to start. I mean, throughout always, but at least to start, you're not imposing anything. Not that imposing is ever good, but at least to start, you really show them that you're totally on their side. Of course, throughout, you're always on their side. But you start off with asking permission. So can I share an observation? There's something I noticed when we were by your house, or whatever it is. And then you can say it as objectively as possible. I've noticed, it's just, I felt attention. Now, I could be off, it could have been something that I brought in with me from before. So you're leaving them space to dignify, to clarify with dignity, but also be aware that if it is abuse, then they may minimize it and rationalize it, but that's a separate thing. We cannot force someone to admit that there's abuse. We cannot force someone in an abusive situation to actually deal with it right now.
Right.
And I don't want to talk much about abuse.
Right.
But let's assume that it's not an abusive situation, and the one who's closer should be the one to bring it up to the and say, I've been noticing. Is there something that I can do, or do you want to talk about it? Let's go out for coffee.
I like that. Do you want to talk about it? That leaves them room if they want to.
And
share
it opens
or when
it.
they're
It
ready
opens
to
for
share.
when they're ready.
Right, because it could come across. I mean, it could have an impact on the friendship to begin with, just because they might not be ready for that, and eventually they may be. So there is something.
But you have to be aware that more than you would think, that it does impact the friendship. And then when you do, what has happened, and people have, is that when they have helped somebody, in the end the friendship falls apart because the person who was helped feels less than. The relationship is not even anymore. But you have to decide beforehand if you're willing to take that risk for this person who you really love, you really care for them.
Right.
So it is
It's
a
a tricky
possibility.
balance.
It is a possibility that you will lose it.
Right.
You will lose it because it's their dignity. It's their way of coping. And even if you didn't help them, but you noticed it,
Or know,
or even know it.
know some information that they don't
So
feel
it's something that you
comfortable
have to really put some thought to.
with. Okay.
The other thing that you might also say is, whatever you share with me is not my story to share. I'll never share it with anybody. Words like that, even though, of course, between friends we're never going to share, but to keep stressing it. And I found using the words like, it's not my story to share, really lands well on other people. And they realize, besides the fact that I do this as professionally,
Right.
so I couldn't do this if I would share people's stories.
Right.
So I can say that now, but even as a friend, I was always, my thing is like, it's not my story. I have no right to share it. And also importantly is that when I do try to normalize, which we'll talk about a little bit maybe, I don't share anyone else's stories, and definitely not with names, and I'm very good at mixing up details because
Yay.
and that makes it even easier because my stories, sometimes the details don't make sense,
I
but
knew
the
there
point is
was a
there.
reason I should be grateful that my memory is going.
Oh, it
This
does
is it.
make it easier.
Makes it easier to help people if you have no memory. Excellent. So then came another question came from somebody who was told about somebody else. So it was about their own relative. So a friend of their sister
Okay.
came and said to them, "We noticed that your sister and her husband seem to be struggling. You should do something about it. Why don't you find out what's going on?"
So that becomes very tricky. Because family members generally take sides. Ironically, they don't always take the side of their own sibling. Sometimes they take sides of the other one, but they usually are taking sides. And it becomes very tricky because then you get very involved. It's many times easier for a friend or someone who's objective to get involved, especially when we're not talking about the hard issues.
Right.
When we're talking about hard issues and someone really needs to be extricated from a marriage or really needs a lot of support, that's one thing. But when we're talking about smaller things like, let's define what we're talking about.
Okay, great.
So
I got a whole bunch of different,
Go
very
ahead.
specific scenarios, so we can pull from that.
Go ahead.
But some of the things that people were saying that they noticed, of course, in other marriages, right? But some of the things that they noticed was that the husband was out working longer hours. Both are working, but he works longer hours. When he comes home, he's done. No
okay.
baths, no
Okay.
cleanup. He's
Yeah.
done, and she just feels
Okay.
like, hey, I also work.
Right. Okay. So that's a typical scenario, or something else, and we can talk about those different scenarios specifically. But I just want to talk about when we're talking about softer problems or just general marriage problems, is money, which is a pretty big one, or in-laws. These are things that are typical.
These are
They're
big
in
ones.
very different variations, but these
Right.
things are what we're talking about. Communication, lack of communication skills, sometimes silent treatment, sometimes just don't know how to handle conflict. We're talking about different parenting styles. We're talking about
right.
slightly different religiosity styles, or even larger religiosity, moving up, down, left, right, all kinds of movements,
Interesting, right?
values. So that's what
Not
we're talking
being
about.
appreciated.
So, yeah.
These are the
So those are the kind of things that we're talking about. So those kind of things. Now, going back to your question about a relative and those issues, you could see now how, firstly, if we're talking about something about values, the family that I grew up
Right.
in is the values that I have, and most likely my sibling has. So now you're also talking about my values. And now I'm going to gang up against, you said sister, so I'm just going to say
Yeah.
brother-in-law. Now we're both ganging up against the brother-in-law. So it's less possible to be objective. On the other hand, when there's just a lack of communication skills, when it's really, you're still going to pick sides. Sometimes it is your sister who's the one who has the problems, or the less communication skills, or doesn't know how to work with her husband's communication skills, and he's really being calm, and she's the one who's always screaming.
Right.
So then you can see why someone would side with the brother-in-law and be upset with their sister, especially if they were upset with their sister all along, because their sister always fought with them. So you can see how
A lot of
it
dynamics that
it
get
gets
involved.
complicated.
Right.
So as the sister, you may say, I've been noticing, and maybe you'd like to get some skills. And to me, therapy is like a godsend. With the right therapist, it's like the best thing that ever happened. You're shortcutting all the life's problems that you eventually, with life's problems, you get new skills, or you ought to.
Right.
You may as well use them as learning opportunities. But with therapy, you're shortcutting all that. You don't have to have all of life's problems, and you're just getting new skills. So I like to, with the right therapist. Yes, that is true.
Right.
That is
And
true.
it's tricky, but worth
Yeah,
it.
but assuming we got the right therapist, then we're just shortcutting skills. So I like to recommend, and there are ways to get to the right therapist, and there's organizations in Crown Heights that help people get to the right therapist. I know that, and we'll post the information.
Perfect.
The Shamas organization, there's another organization that's just starting up with getting people to the right therapists, depending on what their needs are. There's Relief has also a referral service, and Mask has referral services. So there are ways to get to the right therapist for the right needs, and also a therapist is a shidduch in a way.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I always
It is
tell
definitely
say
beside the shidduch of the insurance and the scheduling, but it's really a
that.
personality
It's
thing.
a very
And I always
vulnerable
say,
relationship. You want to make sure that you're comfortable with the person that you're speaking to.
definitely, and you could interview them back, but that's again a whole separate.
We have a lot of. We could just keep meeting.
Yeah, maybe we could. So in any case, you can, as a sister, again, depending on your relationship, you might offer, maybe we should find you ways to get some of the skills that you need. And even if it's the husband who has the issue, who really
Right.
has the issue, and he won't go to therapy, again, we're using the scenario that it's a sister,
Right.
but really it goes both genders. I just want to keep stressing that.
Okay.
Well, stress is an equal opportunity.
Very generous. Yes.
Yes. But there we go. Let me have a drink of water.
Sure. Even if he's the one who has the issues, therapy can help her learn how to deal with his issues so that the whole house could be more
Right. Even
peaceful
if
and it benefits her.
Right, and again, she's getting the skills that you
Right.
can use everywhere and
We
anywhere.
can't change anybody else,
Oh,
so
absolutely
it is
Right.
helpful.
Right.
Okay. So so you brought up opposite gender. That did come up. What if a friend's husband approaches me with struggles that they're having, and he wants me to sort of be mashpia on his wife? Could you speak to her about this and this and this? I think she'll accept it from you.
It becomes very tricky. Firstly, there's a few parts that can be tricky here. Firstly, the relationship with someone else's husband. Now, if it's a one-time conversation, that's fine. But if it comes back, remember, he's vulnerable. For some people, being the savior makes the relationship uneven. So if you're saving their marriage and he's vulnerable, there's room for weirdness. Okay. So just that, and we can talk about boundaries, and I hope that we do have time to talk
Yeah.
about boundaries in the end. So there's that. Now, it's a little tricky to go at someone after someone else reported the problem. Like, your husband told me.
Right.
So that you would have to have the right relationship with the friend to be able to say that, to know how to bring it up without letting her know that her husband told you.
So you would say, don't bring up where it came from.
If it's possible, depending
Right.
on what the problem is, what the situation is, because sometimes it's not really possible to have known the situation if someone didn't say it.
Right.
In this situation, I might offer the husband some. This is what I think. How can I share a perspective of how you might be able to bring it up with her? Maybe this is as a
That's a
female's
good one.
perspective. That's where I would think that a husband coming to or a spouse coming to the other spouse, can I have a perspective of a man, or can I have a perspective of a woman of what's going on for her? that might, and then you can explain, or you can just, if he did come to you, say, can I just share a perspective? This is what it might feel like, as a woman, as her friend. This is what might be going on for her when you said X, Y, and Z. This is how she might have been receiving it. Is that possible? And again, you're leaving room for him to clarify it with dignity. That's, maybe I didn't think of it in that way, or no, that's not possible, or whatever. And but really, the general idea is to give the couple the skills, to empower the couple, each of the couple to resolve their own situations.
Okay. And then what happens when somebody is in a position where they are helping a couple and everything's fine and it's helpful and they appreciate the help, but it gets to the point where it sort of feels like the helper is getting dragged down. It's like a never-ending cycle. They constantly want her help, and where it might have felt good to be that helper in the beginning with all the answers, now she just feels like she's like that
Sucked
permanent Shalom Bayis button where, okay, so we have this issue. I want to go out and have a babysitter, and he says we shouldn't pay for a babysitter. Now what? And it seems like every problem now they're calling.
Okay. So that's where boundaries comes in. And you can say straight up that I call me for the big ones, and this is not big. I mean, you can have a sense of humor about it, but after a while, now remember, some people you're going to have to cut off. You're just really going to have to cut off. There's nicer ways to do it, and then there's more abrupt ways if they don't take the nicer ways.
So
But
levels.
if it's dragging down your life, and eventually it can get into your own Shalom Bayis. Look, it's like, who's Shalom Bayis now?
Right.
Theirs or ours? So there is definitely boundaries. It should not have gotten to the point. And so that's something you have to keep an eye on before it gets to the point where it drags you down. It's like, we can chat about this. And what I like to do is when someone calls me, it's like, I have 7 minutes. I have 2 minutes left. And when people know that you don't have endless of coffee, they can get to it quicker. The other thing is, I usually like to tell people, think about it before you call me so we can really maximize our time together.
Right.
Now, I know that's professional language and it's not like really friends sitting over coffee kind of language, but turn it into whatever rolls off your tongue easier.
Right.
But the truth is that you do want to maximize, for your sake and for her sake, you want to maximize their time together, because sometimes people need to think it through out loud. But for her sake, she should have thought it through before she comes to you.
If she wants the help, wants to move forward.
Because she really needs to have thought it through, or think it through, or move the thinking forward a little bit, so that you're not the only one who she thinks through. Maybe the initial, finally she's able to let go. Yes, you can sit down for a long coffee and then have a second coffee and a third coffee, but after that, no more caffeine.
I was going to say, no, keep going. As much coffee as you need. Make up problems. Keep drinking. But yeah.
But afterwards, set up a system of how we're going to share. You can call me, at night for about 15 minutes or whatever. And the other thing is also, let me know before you call me, so I can let you know if it's a good time.
Right.
So, text me and I'll let you know if it's a good time. And then you could actually say, no, it's not a good time.
It's not a good time.
And then she can also say, if I say yes, if I can say no to you, that means my yeses are real yeses. If I can tell you that I can't talk to you now, then when I say yes, it means I really can talk to you.
That is a good one.
And tell that to yourself as
say
well.
No. Right.
Remember, there's the yes and no seesaw. When you're saying yes to somebody else, you're saying no to something in your own life. You're saying yes to talking to her. You're saying no to, 100 other things that you could be doing at home. Yes, I know we as women, we can wash our dishes and talk to somebody. But
Nobody needs to know that we can't wash dishes.
but that's about it. Only wash.
Right. Okay, fine.
But so remember that, and you're giving away your own time and your own sanity or your own peace of mind for that time. And if it's really draining you afterwards, you really have to think about it, because even therapists, we really have to keep a balance so that we don't take on someone else's problems.
Right. And so that brings to another scenario of somebody mentioned that every time she gets together with a friend, it's always like this laundry list of complaints. Doesn't want any solutions, but just that, all the things, and, oh, you're so lucky that your husband this, mine never does that, and, oh, mine never does that. And she was Like, is that something that she's supposed to help with? Or is it about saying, yeah, you get it.
So, I mean, there's something like someone says, oh yeah, your husband, oh my husband too, or like all men are like that, and then they just turns into this men bashing thing, or I mean, we're just talking, assuming that it's talking to women here, but
Right.
it goes both ways, but less so on men. Just don't talk about it as much for a variety
At
of
least
reasons.
not to me for this.
Yeah, for a variety of
Right.
reasons, men don't talk to their friends as much, but when they do, they talk real. But sometimes it turns into men bashing. Men are just men in general, and they make some, and there are some good jokes, and there's some lousy jokes, but and then so it's interesting. It would be interesting to think about why she come to you with all the men bashing. Are you a good men bashing partner?
Right.
Or husband bashing, or and some people just feel comfortable in someone else's. You have a bad marriage, I have a bad marriage, and we can just bash each other, and we feel good in each other's company, so we're good. And then, but if you really want to be helpful to her and to yourself and to your own dignity and to your own marriage, don't engage in her men bashing. It's really find out, what do you want from me in this conversation? What is it that you want from this conversation? Do you want to just vent? Do you really want a solution? If you just want to vent, then just listen, and okay, 7 minutes and vent till the end of my coffee
Right,
or whatever.
have a timer.
And you can have an espresso.
For the venting session.
Find out
The
what
small
she
ones.
wants from this conversation. Because if she really wants a solution, or she just wants to vent, or whatever it is, be that. Or if it's something that you can't, I can do venting for 3 minutes. I can try to help you come up with a solution. But then can we talk about the museum we want to go to,
Right,
or whatever
something
it is?
else.
Because I mean, our friendship is not only about our complaints. We should have good times as well.
Right. And that actually, so then let's say that we're in this place where we get past just the venting and we're working on solutions. So how do you find that balance? I'm going to need more information, but I don't want to push her to share things with me that, I mean, it's her private life, but she did come to me.
Right.
So how do we engage in that? Just leave it up to her? Are there types of questions that I could ask? How do we go about that?
There's a few things that we really have to consider. Does she really want solutions? Because most people have the answers, have the solution for themselves. And it's
That's
just
the
our
therapist
role.
talk.
It's just our role to help pull it out.
Right.
So if that being said, then there's different kinds of questions. Yes, you may need to ask a few prying questions to get a little bit more of the story so that you can know how to pull it out. But one of the first things you talk about is, you mentioned the feelings that she had, that you picked up. And also, and did I get that right? That kind of thing.
Right.
You're always leaving room for her dignity, because the more she feels heard and the more she feels that she has room for her dignity, the more empowered she feels. Now, I'm not saying that she's going to feel super empowered, but think of it the other way. If you're making herself feel worse, then she feels even less empowered than she felt when she came into the conversation.
Oh, that's no good.
So you try to make her feel as empowered or as powered as you can, with little things like affirmations. You can even have an affirmation meaning like you're a good person, you're a good wife, you want what's best for your family, those kinds of things. You have to mean it, of course.
Well, things you would want to hear.
Yeah, but
Right.
you have to mean it, and some means you have to know the person.
Right.
And if
right,
you
right.
don't know the person, then something that you picked up in the conversation. Don't pull out something out of your pocket.
Right.
Oh, this worked with the last person I spoke to, so I'm going to just throw that at you. It has to really work, and it has
Right.
to really, your tone and your body language and everything has to really work with it. You could also, if you know the couple, and you can actually affirm and say something nice about the husband as well. He really cares. You may come from two different normals.
Right.
And then you try to
big
normalize
thing.
what's going on. So again, you're giving them a perspective, because not everything even needs a solution. Sometimes the solution is just put things in perspective. I always say that you're coming from two different genders. You're coming from two different families. You write off that, and that's just right there.
Right.
Then you end in two different schools and two different summers and two different cities that you grew up in. You have to just have different perspectives
On everything.
on everything. And so it might be worthwhile just to hear what his perspective is on this.
Right.
It could be this, it could be this. And so you just saw three options of what it might be, and using the word might, not should or anything like that. And I love the
Okay.
word might. It's one of my favorite words, meaning that it could be this, it doesn't have to be this. It might be, it might not be, and that's all fine. So it might be, and you give her 3 scenarios that it could be, just to show her that what you're thinking may not really be what it is at all. So sometimes just giving someone perspective. Or what did your husband say about, what was his perspective on it?
That's important information to get if you're trying to help.
Right, and just sometimes that really does make sense. Considering where he's coming from, that really makes sense. And one of the typical things is like, the men learn something in yeshiva about certain minhagim around.
No, that's coming. That's it.
Okay.
Come Pesach, right? We're very close to Pesach.
Yes, okay.
But I was going to say that's specific that you said different levels of religiosity, and that one is a big one, especially when it comes to Pesach. So somebody said that the conversations that she's hearing, it's a lot of complaints from him about how she is not keeping. This is the husband he's always taught that the husband comes with his whatever rules there are and his minhagim about Pesach, and naturally the way that he always understood it to be is that she follows along with what his are, and instead she wants to give the kids all the kosher Pesach chips and cookies that he never had in his house, and she wants to have more processed food than he ever has, and she's arguing, well, I'm the one who has to sit in the kitchen and cook, and I'm the one who's taking care of the kids, so it becomes this.
Okay, so I'm just to say to that one, you mentioned kids, so we're not talking about the first Pesach or they were
right. Although
years
it's
have
possible
had
it's the
to
first
happened.
one they're making. I don't know.
But there's the year. If we're talking about kids, years have happened.
Yes.
So there's a few Pesachs that have happened, and that's what we're talking about blended, like a remarriage, which is we're not talking about that. So there were many Pesachs to have talked about, but what I want to talk about, a slightly different scenario, is where the husband, just to continue with on your scenario, the husband learned something, was inspired by something in his head. This year we're only having schmaltz.
Oh.
Okay? And he wants his wife to cook only with schmaltz. So now we have this, and she's like, what are you talking about? We always had our potato chips, and we always had our walnut oil that cost $26 a gallon. But we always had that, and that's how we're going to, that's how I cook all my recipes are like that. You can't tell me 2 days before Pesach that I can't use my walnut oil recipes, and I have to come up with schmaltz oil, whatever. Okay. Did I make enough of a scenario? Does it sound like he triggered something? No, okay. So really what happens here is that he went through some sort of process to come to this new realization that she did not go through. So he's ahead of her. He cannot just impose it on her because he feels like it.
Right, he was inspired. She wasn't there whenever he got.
So if he was inspired Hanukkah time and he can kind of bring her along all the way till a couple of weeks before Pesach when she does her Pesach shopping, then maybe. But he can't. So if it's so important to him, show how important it is to him, and go in the kitchen and make, I don't know what you can make with schmaltz, but make whatever it is with schmaltz. And then maybe the next year she'll see how important it was to you, that she might take it over.
Interesting.
So those kind of things, like but this is...
It happens in other areas too. I mean, Pesach sounds simple, but they do, there's so many, like, Hilchos Tznius, all different things that women have. I see that's like a whole other subject.
One of the things that I firmly believe in is that it's not the spouse's role to be a mashpia. So and there's a lot of that goes on. If someone's changing their religiosity up or down, right, left, something else is going on for them, and we really have to address whatever else is going on for that person and or in the relationship. The tznius change, up or down, right or left, it is a manifestation of something. So just to talk to the tznius itself is not really addressing why. People don't change just one day out of the blue. Right. Something triggered that change, whether it's an inspiration or whatever it is. So we have to understand what happened for that person, not just to come out on the tznius, to bring it up or down, or bring the family wherever you want it to be. Something triggered the change, and you have to bring your spouse along. How you bring your spouse along may be necessary to bring a mashpia or a therapist or a really well-designed plan to explain your process.
And if you were looking in and helping somebody else specifically with that, that would be that same idea. Like, however you got from point A to point B, they need to get there with you.
Right.
They need to see what brought that.
So that's if the person wants your insight about how to bring their spouse onto their
Right.
new level. But what's if it's the spouse who's like my husband or my wife or whatever it is making all these changes and I just can't deal with it.
Right.
So then how do you support the spouse who's being changed on?
Right.
And so there it might be also ask your spouse what the process was. I want to understand, this is so important to you. I want to understand how you got to from where we were to where you are today. Help me understand. I'm not saying that I'm going to change, but at least I want to understand. I want to understand you.
Right.
So sometimes our role is just to give them language and perspective and words for getting that perspective. And something simple as I want to understand you. Not that that's the craziest idea. No, you may
Right.
think it's the craziest
Very
idea
helpful.
because you don't have full context.
Right. And what are some good questions that help you get?
Well, those kind of things
context.
is like, help me understand. There's like last year we were doing whatever,
Okay, that's good.
and this year you want something different. Something triggered it. Help me understand what happened. So it's something like help me understand, and then putting the details of what was and what is, and then kind of working out.
Showing
it's a
how it
form-
occurred,
it's a-
right.
Yeah. I mean, you can use the word language that works for you, but certainly not that is so stupid. Tell me what happened. That's
Right.
not going to work. A really, really genuine curiosity, because aren't you genuinely curious?
Right. And putting a
Even
label
if
on
it's a
it
stupid
is-
idea.
It's a judgment, though, if we're saying that it's...
Yeah, but even if you think it's a stupid idea, you also ought to be curious. Like, what happened?
So that's where the entish part could come in and be helpful.
Yeah.
You should at least want to know. So another point that came up, and I know we're not talking deeply about abuse, but somebody wanted to know that if they do think that, I know we touched on it a little bit, but if they do think that it's like somebody comes for help and they start getting involved and they're, here's just some advice. This was actually from an older sister to a younger sister. So she's in the perfect position to be helping her younger sister. And the dynamic of their relationship is one where she is naturally a helper. So she doesn't feel like anything else is getting ruined because of this. But from what she's hearing, it sounds like it's a lot more than what she initially thought. And how do you help bring that other person to realize that they need to go for a deeper level of help, if
So-
that's possible?
Right. So it's hard for someone who's in an abusive relationship to hear the word abuse.
Okay, it's a good word to avoid then.
So you really avoid it until you have to, because once they get into denial, then you may have lost the relationship for a while or the opportunity for a while. So you can say, that sounds really tough. That sounds like something I couldn't handle. Just to kind of help her get to realize that all her rationalizations, this is a little bit off. I would like for you to talk to my friend who deals with this, with similar situations that might work. But also realize that she may shut down. She may be forced to shut down.
Right.
So it is tricky. If you really suspect abuse, speak to a professional who can help you with the specific dynamics, because you don't want to make it worse.
Okay, so
You also don't want her to
get
shut down,
help.
so you get help for helping her. Because you don't want her to shut down either. You want to keep your conduit open. So really my suggestion is don't even start the conversation. If you suspect anything, don't start the conversation. Put out whatever you know to a professional, and then let them advise you with the specifics. But don't go there if you think it's abuse.
Okay. And in general, any other good do's or don'ts in this? I mean, we went through a lot of them, but if we would
Okay, so,
summarize some.
So in general, listen.
listen.
Sometimes people love to talk, and sometimes people don't want to talk that much. But again, your advice is not, it's really not a good idea to give advice. That's my advice. Don't give advice.
Don't give advice.
For starters, you don't know enough context.
Okay.
You also don't want the responsibility of your advice because you don't have enough context, and you give advice, it may flop. There's a likelihood, some level of likelihood that it will flop, and then you will have caused some new problem.
That you might be in the middle of.
and beside your own regret and guilt, and the friendship and whatever. So and more importantly is they really do know what they ought to be doing. They just maybe need help picking it out from all their stress or from all their frustration. So that's your role, is really to ask some good questions.
Okay.
And good questions might be something like, what do you really want to do?
Okay.
Those are coaching language. That's really, that's simple. What do you really want to do? And I don't know. Well, if you did know, what would you want to be? Or what would you advise your friends?
Dinner. What do you want to eat for dinner? If you did know, I'm going to try that one. I will let you know how it goes.
But it does work sometimes.
Right.
Or if your friend came to you with this, what would you say? Or what do you wish someone would tell you to say? What do you wish someone would tell you? Sometimes these things it's on the tip of their tongue. They just want to be pull it out. So really, your advice, and besides that, if they're not ready to hear your advice, they can't act on it, because it really has to come from within themselves.
Right.
Some other language that you might use, just in general, is like, can I share a perspective? Can I share an idea? I mean, this is something that worked. You can see how, this is something that worked that I've read about. It's something that worked with some other people. You can see how this lands on you, or how this fits with your situation, or how this resonates. Those kind of words, because again, you're leaving them room to say, I didn't explain it right, or like that's not quite it. The other thing is to share words like, you don't want to say things like, so what you're saying is. Rather say, share words, so what I'm hearing. Because if the misunderstanding if there is a misunderstanding in the conversation, so who's the onus on? The one who said it or the one who heard it? You don't want to push the onus that she didn't say it right. So you say, so what I'm hearing, and then she could say, no, that's not what I meant. Rather, when you're saying, so what you're saying, that means that she said it wrong because I misunderstood it.
Right.
So you can say, so what I'm hearing, or so what I understand, or did I get that right, or something like that. So you're trying to leave her with as much power and much dignity as possible, because any tiny thing that you're stripping away her confidence also. So you're trying to build it back up, so or at least neutralize it. So those kind of words will help it. So it seems like, or so what I'm understanding, or those kind of words.
Okay. So really, that's all in line with the do no harm. Don't go out there. Don't jump in to try to solve all the problems, because that's just putting your own, interpretation or your own experiences on them, and that might not be what's going on for them.
No. Well, you can say, so what I'm sensing is that a lot of frustration. Did I get that right?
Right.
But again, it's the tone, it's the language, it's the body language that really makes a difference of humility. You need real, genuine humility in order for someone to really feel comfortable.
Right.
And if they don't come back to you the next time,
Don't go for it.
well, first don't go. But I'm coming from a different angle. But I want to get to that also. Is if they didn't come back to you, it may be worth reflecting on how that conversation went, and maybe they didn't feel so comfortable or so safe with you. So for the next time, or somebody else's next time, maybe there's something that you could have learned from that conversation. Maybe not. Maybe they didn't come back to you because it was a one-time thing, and they don't have the strength to come back again. But it may
they
be.
figured it out.
Yes.
It could be very helpful.
Yeah. But sometimes it's worth reflecting on how the conversation went, and
Right.
maybe there was a reason why they're not coming back, or maybe there's a reason. Sometimes you can tell when the conversation went flat, like she realizes this is not going the way she wants, and then it's worth reflecting, because in our lives we are humans are connectors, and people may come to you again, and you want to get it better or more right for the next person. So it's always worth reflecting how the conversation went.
And you were going to say about don't go back after them.
Oh, well, it's not 100%. You don't go back after them, but if you feel like you need to go back after them, you could ask them at the end of the conversation, would you like me to follow up?
Okay.
Or if they say, I'm going to go to a therapist, I am going to go to the therapist in the end. You said, would you like me to follow up? When would be a good time for me to follow up? Or I'll check up on it. Is that going to be helpful to you?
Right.
But if they said no, then don't. Even if it's so frustrating to watch them struggle, but they have to own it because only they can solve it, and they have to be in it and recognize it in order to solve it. So you coming and nagging them will not make. Now they have two problems. They feel guilty for not solving their problem, and they have the problem.
Right.
And there's other problems as well between the relationship. There's a lot that goes on when you start nagging them to solve their own problem.
Right. They probably have enough of that.
Yes, they do. Another thing is that we didn't cover from any of your questions, but I think that it's worth bringing up, is sometimes their perspective is just not accurate. So we spoke a little bit about hearing their husband's perspective,
Right.
but sometimes you can actually challenge them and say, what does your husband think? What was really going on? Again, depending on your relationship, what was really going on there? You know, because they can try. What I have seen is people say, you know, solve this dispute between me and my husband.
Right.
And you can almost see with their body language that
They're right, and
that they're right, and they just want you to agree with them, but sometimes they're not right.
Right.
And so now you're in a little bit of a tricky situation. But depending on your friendship, like, do you want me to say the truth, what I really feel, or do you want me to say what you want what you want to hear? Because if you want the truth, I think that your husband's perspective has a lot of validity, especially from where he's coming from. I'm not saying that hers isn't right.
Right. That's
Yours
important.
also has a lot of validity from where you're coming from. The husband didn't wake up in the morning and say, "I'm going to annoy her today." He has much better things than having an annoyed wife.
Right.
If he does that, then we have a whole set of different problems. But we're talking about, we did say in the beginning that we're talking about a soft problem. So he didn't wake up saying, "I'm going to annoy her today." He has his reality, and his perspective is based in his reality. Again, firstly, gender, his own schedules, his own experiences, and 100 other things. So it makes sense to him. Now it's just a matter of you understanding why it makes sense to him. It may not make sense to you, and even though it makes sense to him, it may not make sense to you, or you don't like it.
Right. That's.
But at least you
more-
can admit that it
more
makes
likely.
sense. Now we have two people who make two ideas that make sense. Now we have to come up with some sort of understanding of how this can work. You can't have a kid go to two different schools, you know, because the one school makes sense to the mother, one school makes sense to the father. And
Right.
a kid can't go to two different schools. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there are ways to compromise. One spouse wants to go on vacation to nature. One spouse wants to go to culture. So you can find a place in Europe that has a little bit of each.
Just
and-
not now. Nobody go to Europe now.
Yeah, this is being filmed during coronavirus. In case you're watching this
Should be
later.
Sure.
But one day Europe will be back
Yes.
to normal.
Yes.
So, but those are kind of things that you can actually work out.
Right.
And you can actually, you know, open your world up to your spouse's interests, and you can find that nature is not all that weird, and nature has some culture in it too, and cities have some nature too.
Right.
You know, so there's a way, and open up your world, and your world expands. But sometimes you really can't. You have to choose one or the other. And so that's where it might be helpful to really understand each other's perspectives, understand each other's contexts, and really have real conversations. The role of the friend may be to help each of the spouses have some more language and to open up their minds to understand how they have different perspectives and, you know, different things like that. But you cannot make a decision. Oh, you must go to this school, you must go to that school, and kind of totally dismiss
The other person.
The other
and-
person.
and the-
Especially as an outsider, you
Yeah, I'm
definitely don't
saying,
want
how
to
do
get
you
involved.
have that, that answer? And then when it comes to, you know, hearing somebody else's perspective, do you have any thoughts on sharing, well, in our marriage, this is how it works?
Okay.
Could
So,
that be,
yeah. It could be, but it could work. Again, it depends on your relationship. That does touch in the category of boundaries,
okay.
like how much are you going to share, and
I guess
what
it
is the
depends what
role,
the issue is also.
and don't let it become about you. Like, don't take over the story. They're the one who
Right.
came in with the issue. Unless you're sitting over coffee and you're both talking about what are we going to do on vacation, and we both like different vacations, and we brainstorm together.
Right.
But many times it's one person's time. It's her issues time, and if you're going to take it over with your story, so just be cognizant of that. Sometimes you realize that in the middle of a story, and you can't extricate yourself from the middle of the story. You say, oh, but you really could. You say, okay, I took up too much airtime. The bottom line is this, And so
Right.
you just kind of wrap it up. She may say, no, actually it was helpful, then you can go back. But generally, make sure that you're not taking up all the airtime. It's really her space. But you can always start it. This is something that worked for us. It may or may not work for you, or this is something that I read in a book, or this is something that worked for somebody else. It may or may not work for you. Start off, again, that humility and that real concern, but again, space that it may not work for you.
Right.
You can end up, you can see how it resonates with you, or how it lands with you, or how it fits in your situation, or if any of it will work for you.
Right.
But sometimes it is your story, but you don't have to share that it is your story.
Right. Or you don't have to one up her.
Oh no,
That's
definitely.
not helping.
No, definitely not here. Not in this case. Maybe some
Right.
other times. When you told me that, I didn't even want to go into my story, but that's another time. That's for another cup of coffee.
Right, right. Okay, so that there's still a space for it, but it's not, you complain that he never picks things up off the floor. Well, let me tell you about what happens in my house. It's a lot worse. You're lucky that that's your only complaint.
That's not. Yeah, this wasn't the place unless you have that kind of relationship. But in general, we're not looking to one up on problems, because we can be more creative, and we can just all of a sudden turn our perspective up and say, hey, I could, that's, what's worse is like he didn't even empty out, not only that, he didn't even empty out the dishwasher, and he didn't take out the garbage, so, mine is worse. But
Right.
but you forgot to mention that he mowed the whole lawn. I mean, okay, in Brooklyn, whatever. The whole lawn in
Sure.
Brooklyn.
No, he did, the whole Brooklyn, one lawn. But that is, a lot of times, maybe some people think they're being helpful if they try to help you, see how lucky you are because, so many other people have it worse, maybe even them.
So there is something called normalizing.
Okay.
And if it's something is normal, then you can normalize it. Like if someone says, my husband doesn't understand me, and you can normalize and say, many men don't, just by being a man, doesn't understand as well. That's normalizing.
Right.
But
not minimizing.
Not minimizing and not one-upping or catastrophizing, or that's
Right.
awful. But just sometimes normalizing has a very important role. But normalizing, not in a trying to make someone else's life seem worse.
Right. Doesn't have to be extreme in any
No, it doesn't. No, not comparing. Just
direction.
normalizing it.
comparing. That's a good word. There's a lot of that.
So, yeah, and
not
there's a lot
helpful.
of comparing, and well, then also what happens is sometimes is the one who's the helper, can come home and say, afterwards, and they were quiet the whole time, and then they realize that their husband is guilty of that as well, and they didn't even think of it as a problem. And now all of a sudden, hey, she realized, she brought me into a new perspective that this is a problem. So that's when it becomes a little bit tricky of being the helper, but then in the end you get dragged down. So
Right.
that comparing, it's just that we really have to be healthy from within ourselves and say, I got a lot going, and so part of my man is that, or my spouse, or my family, or my lot, or my whatever, is that I have this. Everyone has something. Sometimes the flip of one good trait is really a negative to somebody else, and you get both.
Right. There's I forgot what it's called, but there's like a personality test where it talks about like the extremes of certain traits, right?
And so some people call it the shadow side of the same thing.
Okay.
Like if you wanted someone who's very involved in the community, the shadow is that he's not home. I mean,
Right.
you can't be both.
Can't be everything.
So you're very proud of your, the father and spouse that's in Hatzalah, but he's also not home by bath time.
Right.
It just is. And so you're putting it in perspective. So that's a little bit of, if you find yourself, again, after these conversations, it's worth decompressing and reflecting about how that went and what mood it put you into. If you found that it put you into a even keel mood, then that's probably best. If you feel like, I feel like a savior, then you have to be careful. It's okay to feel like I helped somebody, but if I like this and it becomes like this my high, then be careful of that. And if it brings you down, then don't do it too often. Or figure out maybe the way that you did the conversation wasn't so good, that you can do it often, but just do the conversation differently.
Right. And like you said, reaching out to get help, especially if it's a family member, so it's somebody that's in your life forever, and you really truly want to help them.
Yeah.
Having some guidance on how to do that is a good idea.
Always. And a little prayer, because you really want God to put the right words in your mouth. And I'm not big into promote, but really, really, sometimes it's amazing what words come out of our mouth. I'm like, where did that come from? It really came from Hashem. Like, wow. because I would not have said that normally. So a little bit of humility and let God's words come out of your
Right.
mouth.
And if you're there for the right reasons, right? If it's coming from your heart, it should enter their heart. So there is
Definitely.
a lot of that.
I just want to give a few more language for
Yeah.
the challenge part, because I think that's something that a lot of people feel afraid to challenge their friends. So there are sometimes, there
By
are
challenge,
words.
you mean rather than just saying, "Oh, that's awful," challenge them to sort of maybe there's something else going on here.
Maybe there's another perspective.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
right.
to clarify.
So you might say something about every situation has two sides. We spoke about your side. What is your husband's side?
Okay.
And we touched on it, but I just want to give some more language. What would he say if he was here right now?
Oh, that's a good one.
Sometimes their expectations are indeed realistic, so you can bring that out. Like with what's happening in your life right now, it's understandable that you want that. It's also understandable that it's not possible.
Right.
You know, like you want free time and you have 3 little kids. It's just, you know, you're not getting rid of your 3 little kids. Like what do you?
Right.
You know, like it's just not. But eventually, I'm telling you, the kids do grow up and your house gets empty.
I think we need to hear that a lot for our next 5 weeks of homeschooling.
The house is still empty.
If you're bored, I can send my kids.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that afterwards. You also can say, have you thought about what you might be contributing to the issue?
Ooh.
Now, some people will say, no, it's all him. There's a big part that's him, but there might be a part that you are triggering a sensitivity for him.
Right.
Not intentionally, of course not intentionally. Otherwise, why would you do it intentionally? But what might it be? Something like that. Again, the word might is helpful.
Yeah, these are good. Really,
Yeah.
you have to be doing thinking too, not just talking. A lot of listening and thinking when you're listening.
I also like to use the words I'm curious about, or I've been wondering about, or I wonder. Again, but meaning it.
But
really
because that
meaning
has
it.
no judgment in it.
Right.
I'm just curious. I haven't looked in and judged that your marriage is this and this and this because I saw
Right.
that.
Right.
You know, I saw that and now I'm wondering if that is working for you or if it's not.
And the other thing is, before you start any of these challenging questions, let's always ask permission.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question that's maybe a little bit hard, and you don't have to answer, but I want to put it out there for you to start, either for you to answer now or for you to think about.
Okay, that's a
You know, because they do need to see another perspective. They aren't always right.
And even if they've come to you, you still request that permission because again, they're in a vulnerable position and
Yeah.
you know,
Again, you want to leave their dignity.
yeah,
And so they came to you, so they're already in a vulnerable position. Don't take advantage of it.
right.
And that means don't ask all those yenta questions so that you get a nice juicy story, because it may be a juicy story or maybe really not all that juicy. And you're looking for that juicy nugget.
You make it worse than it is.
And but
Yeah.
that's also true, is that sometimes we ask questions and they're like, the story isn't all that good anyway. So now they're trying to make it worth your time, so they add more drama to it.
So that they could feel like there's a reason why I came to you because otherwise they just feel maybe dumb
Right.
having come.
Right.
That's interesting.
So you have to be careful not to, not to make a story bigger and not to ask 100 times, not to say, did you speak to somebody else? I think you should speak to somebody else. Because remember, everything we focus on becomes larger and larger.
Right.
It becomes more and more. So if we're looking for more, we're looking for the problem, we're looking for the details of the problem, or we're looking for the nuances. If it's not there, we might make it up. But it was just saying it again and again and again. So many times people say, like, what did your husband? What was one nice thing that your husband did? You know, just to balance this out. What was one nice thing that your husband did? And then to kind of, again, it depends on your relationship. But
Right.
But even if you have a newish relationship, everyone's husband does something right.
Right.
Sometimes, I think very often, and they can probably come up with something. And if they can't come up with something in the last week, in the last year.
Really opening it up.
But really, we have to give them something to ground the goodness in, because
Right.
otherwise, again, they may come up just building the story so that it sounds like a juicy story,
Right.
worth your coffee.
Right. Because It's maybe they feel they're judging themselves maybe for whatever the issue is, but it's normal for us not to have the answers to everything going on, and we do ask for help.
Yeah. I think one of the last things I want to bring up is that you don't have to agree with their decision,
Oh, that's a good one.
and you don't have to break up your relationship over their decision. You can say I don't agree with it. I'm still here to support you. It's not something that I would do, but you're not in a judging way.
Right, it's not like you didn't take my advice, and so now I don't want to talk to you.
Or even if I something that I don't support it, it's like I think you're stupid. That's not what you're trying to say. It's that based on my context and my that's not what I would be doing.
So
But
own
I'll
it.
support you. So I was getting it's saying
My-
it's I statements rather than you
Right,
statements.
right.
That's a stupid idea. Or if I were you, I would never do that. No, I don't support that, but I don't agree with it, but I'll support
But I
you.
support you. Okay, that's important.
So that's very, I think
Especially if you want to maintain that relationship after.
especially if you need to, because it's
Right.
a family member, or if they're really in real problems,
Or small
reason.
communities, I mean, there's a whole bunch of
Right.
reasons why you're going to keep bumping into the same person, so, you know.
It's also important not to agree with them when they speak badly about their spouse, even if you truly believe it too. It doesn't help, and your goal is to be helpful. So if it doesn't help, your objective is to be helpful to their marriage, not for you to feel good about yourself, and not even for her to feel good about herself. It's really for her Shalom Bayis. In order for her Shalom Bayis, you need her to feel good about herself. But sometimes making someone say, hey, your spouse is awful, may make her feel temporarily good about herself. But if it's not really to the ultimate of good of her Shalom Bayis, then it's not the way to go.
Right. And somebody was mentioning that it seems like there's a lot of work that goes into helping other people Shalom Bayis. Maybe we should just mind our own business. But what does it say about Aaron, right? He was ready to Shalom.
Yeah. We can't only mind our own business. We can't. I mean, some of us ought to only mind our own business because we don't yet have the skills of
Right.
knowing how to help. And then there are definitely ways to learn the skills. And I hope that if you actually slow down and listen to this recording slow in pieces, that you can actually
Use
get
it.
get a couple skills. And there's actually on the website, we'll also have a handout with some language. But most of us really ought to be helping people. That's what we're here for, is to help each other.
Right, and it's not about becoming a marriage therapist. It's just
No.
about helping bring somebody to whatever direction they need to get to.
Right. It's if it's done right, it shouldn't be all that exhausting.
Right.
It's in context of relationships. I'm not talking about being a therapist. I'm not talking
Right.
about being a coach. I'm not talking about being a mashpia. Everyone has a few friends. You don't have to do it for so many people.
Right.
And if you're known to be a good listener, you can still limit the amount of people that you listen to.
Right.
Let somebody else become a good listener.
And there's humility in that also, in knowing that you can go to your friends.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes you'll have to go to a mashpia afterwards or a friend
Right.
just to decompress. But remember, it's not your story to tell.
Okay.
So, and on the final note, which I really wish we had said earlier, is some people have a problem sharing some of the details of the story because I think it's lashon hara, and they don't want to say lashon hara about their spouse.
Okay.
And it becomes tricky because they do need to talk it through in order to work it through. And according to the Chafetz Chaim Foundation, this is not considered in the context of lashon hara. If it has a true purpose, that will not be shared beyond the purpose. So I just wanted to, even though I wish we could now kind of edit it and put it into the right place in
Let's
the
just
talk,
stick it in.
but it's really important to note that lashon hara it's not an issue when we're talking about dealing with Shalom Bayis, as long as
Right.
within
If
the
you're not
context
doing
of
it to be
support.
yentish and it's for support, then it's not lashon hara. It's simply giving over information
Right.
so that
You don't have to
whoever's
share
helping you-
more than you need
Right.
to, but it should
They
be
need a
shared.
full story, a full context.
Definitely.
That's important.
Okay, so now I don't want to end on that, so let's end on
Okay.
something a little bit
Yeah,
more
so
useful.
but let's review that when we're helping somebody else with Shalom Bayis, right? If we suspect that it's a hard problem, our goal really is to help get them to a professional that could give them the help that they need. And if we suspect that it's a soft problem and we feel like we're in a healthy place, then our job is to listen, try and get as much context as we can, help them see another perspective if there's another perspective that exists, which there almost always,
Almost always is.
and try to elicit from them what they feel like they really need to do so that we could support them in that.
Yeah.
And if they make a choice that we don't necessarily agree with, we still support them, even if we don't agree with their choice.
Yes.
All right.
A great summary.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Nechami. This was
Thank
fun.
you. Yes, it was. Even with our Purell in the middle, keeping us safe. But yeah, these are really important things because
Yeah, especially now with the corona, there's going to be new challenges.
challenges.
So that's why it's super important to be a good listener, because we really don't have solutions to
We don't
people's
have
issues.
it.
We can't even imagine what's going on for some
Right.
people.
But it also does show how connected we all are.
Yeah.
So back on that, how maybe I should just mind my own business and not get involved. That's not possible because we are so interconnected. So if if there's a way to help bring more shalom, then that's our job in a healthy way. All right.
Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.